What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So wrote William Shakespeare in Romeo and Juliette. You may have seen videos or articles saying Jesus is not the real name of the Son of God. But there's much more to it than these people say. While we're at it, we'll look at what the real name of God is too, and that is almost guaranteed to surprise you. If you've seen any articles or videos saying Jesus is not his real name, you may have been confused. You may also have run across people who regularly call Jesus Yeshua and wondered why they do that. And what about God? Is God his name or his title? And what about people who won't say God at all? Why is that? This topic is one that has caused arguments for many years. In fact, one Christian denomination, Jehovah's Witnesses, largely exists because they disagree about the name of God. As it turns out, they are only part right, but are wrong about more than they are right about, including the question of who Jesus is. But that's another topic for another time. So what about the names Jehovah and Jesus? Are there reasons to say they are not the real names of God and his Son? Stay with me and don't get frustrated when I tell you the truth is there's no simple yes or no answer to that question. If your first language is English, Jehovah and Jesus are perfectly fine as names for God and his Son because they are English words. However, neither one are the names in other languages. You probably already know that in Spanish, the name Jesus looks the same as the English name, but is not pronounced the same. In Spanish, the name is pronounced Jesus. A different syllable is accented, and the J is pronounced like an H, just like every other word in Spanish that begins with J. This points up the first problem with the names Jehovah and Jesus, the letter J. Modern languages have it. Ancient languages did not. The letter J did not exist in Latin, Greek, Aramaic, or Hebrew. So where did the letter J come from? The answer is J was added to the alphabet in European languages beginning in the 14th century and really only became official in the 16th century, just 400 years ago. The letter J was originally just an elongation of the letter I and was meant to provide emphasis, but eventually it was given its own sound and a place in the alphabet right after I. However, as we've already noted, J is not pronounced the same in every language that adopted it. In English, J is pronounced J, as in jump, but in Spanish, J is pronounced like the English H, as in the name of Javier, but in German, J is pronounced Y, like the letter Y in English, as in the name Johann. Speaking of Y, that letter didn't exist until Roman times. The Romans took the Greek upsilon, which is the equivalent of the English U, but they didn't want U and V, which they pronounced like the English W, next to each other, so they put it next to last in the Latin alphabet. After that, the U lost its Greek pronunciation and gradually became the Y we know in English. Later, the Latin V was subdivided into both U and W. So Jehovah and Jesus are English versions of the name of God and his Son, but they couldn't be the names in the original languages because the letter J didn't exist yet. So what are the real names? First, let's make it clear that in English, Jehovah and Jesus are the real names. They just aren't the names in the original languages. So don't let anyone tell you that you're doing it wrong when you say Jehovah and Jesus. When the New Testament was written, the lingua franca, that is, the worldwide language of diplomacy and commerce, was Greek. That's because Alexander the Great had spread the Grecian Empire all the way to India in the 3 centuries before Christ. The Roman Empire had only taken over about 140 years before Jesus was born, so the New Testament was written in Greek because that's the language people spoke in the then known world. It would take a couple of centuries of Roman domination before Latin became the dominant language in that empire. In Greek, Jesus is spelled iota, eta, sigma, omicron, upsilon, sigma, and pronounced Jesus, very close to the Spanish Jesus. So Jesus is a transliteration from the Greek letters to the equivalent English letters. But because those letters are pronounced differently and the rules of accents are different, Jesus sounds very different from Jesus. They are the same name, just pronounced differently in different languages. Earlier I mentioned the German name Johann. To show how different a name can be in different languages, here are the variations on that name. In German, Johann. English, John. Irish, that is Gaelic, Sean. French, Jacques. Italian, Giovanni. Hungarian, János. John is one of the most common names in the world. In fact, almost every language has its own version of the name John. Of course, John is a name that appears many times in the New Testament, including the name of one of the 4 Gospels. So how is John spelled and spoken in Greek? Iota, omega, alpha, nu, eta, sigma, pronounced Ioannes. So what is the Apostle John's real name? Well, in Greek, it's Ioannes, but in English, it's John. As an aside, for the theology degree I earned back in the Dark Ages, I had to take 5 quarters of New Testament Greek. That doesn't mean I'm fluent, but it means I can read a Greek New Testament and recognize a lot of the words. The rest, I know how to look up. I had friends in college who specialized in various languages. One time several of us got together and sung the round Frère Jacques in 5 languages: the original French, English, German, Spanish, and Greek. I did the New Testament Greek translation. Frère Jacques in English is Brother John. But did you know that the name John goes back even further, to Hebrew? This YouTube channel grows out of my biblical historical fiction series, Age of the Kingdom. 3 novels are available now, which tell the stories of King Saul, King David, and King Solomon from the viewpoint of fictional and minor biblical characters. To research these books, I learned the basics of Hebrew. I have links in the description to more information about the series and a video trailer to give you a feel for the books. Now back to the name John. Yes, there are Johns in the Old Testament too, but in Hebrew the pronunciation is different again. This time it's Yohanan. The Hebrew letters are Yod, Vav, He, Nun, and Nun Sophit. Transliterated to English, that's I-V-H-N-N. V, where did that come from? And where are the vowels? Well, Hebrew doesn't really have vowels, just dots and dashes accompanying the consonants called vowel pointing, which indicate the vowel sounds. As for the letter Vav, as it was called in Old Testament times, or Wow, as it's called today, it can be pronounced as a V, a W, a U, and even an O, depending on its position in the word and the vowel pointing. In Yohanan, it's pronounced O. 1 Chronicles 3:15 tells us King Josiah, a descendant of King David, had a son named John. And the sons of Josiah were the firstborn Johanan, the second Jehoiakim, the third Zedekiah, the fourth Shallum. But what about Jesus? Does that name appear in the Old Testament? Yes, it does. It's the name you may have heard people use for Jesus, Yeshua, or also rendered as Yehoshua, Yod, He, Shin, Vav, Ayin. When Yeshua is translated in English, it is the name Joshua, which is the name of one of the books of the Old Testament. The name Jesus means God will save. The Yeho in Yehoshua is the same as the Jeho in Jehovah. The name Yeshua is the name a lot of Christians use when they want to use the real name of Jesus, which is fine, but it's really a tempest in a teapot because, as we've seen with John, all names are pronounced differently from one language to another. So what about Jehovah? As we've said, there's no J in Greek, Latin, or Hebrew, so that's not the name of God in any ancient language. In Hebrew, the word that became Jehovah is usually pronounced Yahweh. The Hebrew letters are Yod, He, Vav, He, which are translated as J, or better I, H, V, H. So you can see how English speakers got to Jehovah. It is often referred to as the Tetragrammaton, which in Greek means 4 letters. The Jeho shows up in a lot of names like we've looked at, Joshua and Johann, but also Jehoshaphat. It is less obvious in English names like Isaiah, which in Hebrew is Yeshayahu, the last syllable being comparable to Jeho with different vowel pointing. The same is true of Josiah, which in Hebrew is Yoshiyahu. However, it's important to note that after the Babylonian captivity, about 400 years before Christ, during the rise of the synagogue period, Jews began teaching that it was wrong to pronounce the name of God. So when they came to the name Yahweh in the Old Testament, they would instead pronounce Adonai, which is Hebrew for Lord. Interestingly, most English Bibles also have Lord instead of transliterating Yahweh. Especially in the King James Version, you'll often see Lord God. That's the way they translate Yahweh Elohim. Elohim is another Hebrew name for God that the Jews shared with the Canaanites. It was often shortened to El, and we see it in names like Elijah and Daniel, and many more. Translating Yahweh as Lord is what bent the Jehovah's Witnesses out of shape. They insist that English Bibles should translate Yahweh as Jehovah, the real name of God. But Yahweh can also be translated Lord, just like Adonai. Interestingly, Jews now will not even say Adonai, but will either write God as G-D or Hashem, which simply means the name. But technically, neither Yahweh or Jehovah are the name of God. When Moses met God before he led Israel out of slavery in Egypt, he asked who he should say sent him, and God told him his name is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which is Hebrew for I am who I am. I don't know anyone who calls God Ehyeh, I am, but that's who God told Moses to tell the Israelites had sent him. I am is interpreted as the self-existent one, perpetually in present tense. God always is in every time and every place. Space and time are part of God's creation, so he exists apart from space-time, but at the same time inhabits all of it. Mind-bending, I know. So what are the real names of God and Jesus? The answer is, it depends. It depends on what language you speak and what faith community you belong to. Ultimately, our universal need for God and the salvation that comes in Jesus are what's most important, not what we call them. God speaks all the languages. The important thing is that we call on God in the first place. That's all for now. If these videos speak to you, like this video and subscribe to my channel. See you next time as we explore more stories from the Age of the Kingdom.